Hello, everyone. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. Today I'm going to talk about conservatism. I'm going to base this talk on an article I wrote and posted on my website, engineeringpolitics.com. The article I wrote goes under the same name as this episode, Conservatism Defined. I want to review the principles that make conservatism unique and some of the misconceptions and mischaracterizations people attribute to conservatism, like the race criticisms and accusations of hating the poor. There are several conservative principles that are pretty consistent. Even though conservatives are diverse in what policies they advocate for and the standards they hold their elected officials to, I want to go over 6 different principles that I find very important to the conservative movement. So, without further delay, let's get this podcast moving. You're listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. This is podcast number 2, named Conservatism Defined. Before we get into the principles themselves, we must first define conservatism itself. Conservatism is naturally the intent to conserve something. That something can be different depending on your brand of conservatism and the context of the country in which someone is considered a conservative. I bring this point up because people often try to compare conservative in one country to conservative in another country. Conservatism, much like the definition of the left-wing and right-wing parties, are different depending on the context provided by what country those parties are in. For example, a right-winger in a European country advocates for a free market, much like a right-winger would in the US, but typically accept baseline European government policies that help control education, healthcare, and other market sectors often controlled by the state. Where in the US, a right-winger is more likely to advocate for laissez-faire economics, privatized education, or at least school vouchers and privatized healthcare. The right wing in Europe also has a history in race-based politics, where the right wing in the US has the exact opposite history. I think Dr. Jordan Peterson made the best explanation I've heard on these differences. Dr. Peterson explained right-wingers, or conservatives, believe that there are hierarchies, and those hierarchies are important in order to benefit society. The problem with hierarchies is after a while they become large, rigid, and corrupt. This is where left-wingers play an important role by constantly trying to tear down hierarchies. The problem with left-wingers is they demonize all hierarchies or deny that there must be hierarchies, creating a vacuum for a bunch of bad ideas to fill the void. The right wing in Europe has a history of promoting hierarchies based on race, as opposed to the right wing in the US, who promotes hierarchies based on competence and productivity. I plan on writing an article and associated podcast to explain the American and European differences in political parties in the future. Back to the conservative principles. The 6 principles I'll review today are family values, individual liberties, religious freedom, national security, economic freedom, and cultural preservation. I'll go through these principles one by one and explain the conservative view and reasons why they want these principles conserved, as well as the mischaracterizations of these principles forwarded by some non-conservatives. As I said in the intro, you can follow these explanations and arguments from the article I wrote and have posted on the engineeringpolitics.com website, as well as provide feedback, good or bad, on Twitter at ENG_politics. Let's get started. The first principle I listed was family values. Family values includes the promotion of the nuclear family, spousal reliance, and parental autonomy. The promotion of the nuclear family advocates for a 2-parent household. It's extremely important that there is a father and mother figure for the child. There are several studies concluding that when a child is in the care of primarily one parent, that child has a significantly lower chance of life success in terms of economic and social success compared to their 2-parent counterparts. Policies that are advertised as helping single mothers often incentivizes single motherhood, not by making it profitable to have children without a 2-parent household, because having children is never profitable no matter how many parents there are, but removes accountability between the mother and the father, creating a culture of sex without consequences, or leading to an increase of alternatives to parenthood like abortion. The promotion of spousal reliance refers to cohesiveness between the mother and father. It is important for a mother and father to share common principles, and I'm not limiting that to conservative principles. But if parents can't get along to raise their child or children together, the family falls apart and the child suffers the consequences of the broken relationship. The best way to create spousal reliance is marriage. The commitment of marriage signals the unbreakable bond between parents that allow them to focus on the family rather than trying to figure out whether or not they are compatible with each other. That commitment is the foundation of the nuclear family. Parental autonomy refers to the ability for parents to care for their children without interference from the state. This means parents should be allowed to teach, discipline, and raise their children as they see fit. Now, many may argue this opens up the possibility of child abuse without consequences, but to increase the scope of the state to take the parents' children away because the state believes they must parent the parents is not a good enough excuse for overreaching power. Parents, as a general rule, care more about their children than a group of politicians. Opening up parental guidance by the state, beyond the laws that already outlaw physical abuse, causes parenting to become a political issue. Take, for example, some of the policies not allowing parents to tell their kids that they are born a girl or boy. Parents who are not allowing their children to transition to another gender are now under attack for doing what they know is best for their kids. A specific example of this is a recent judicial decision to grant custody to grandparents of a transgender man. Or, I guess, a boy in this case, since the child is only 17. This happened because the parents didn't allow the child to take hormone replacements for a transition. So, the state took the kid away from the parents. This story was reported by CNN in 2018. This shows how far an overreaching government can go when they don't value family. Some of the other mischaracterizations non-conservatives use to attack family values is claiming conservatives actually just want to oppress gays, women, and minorities. The oppression of gay people is of course forwarded by the promotion of the nuclear family. Now this does have some historical founding since the outlaw of gay marriage has been supported by Republicans and Democrats, not allowing people to marry who they love. This has changed for the most part. Most Republicans and basically all Democrats support gay marriage, which has now been legalized and protected by the federal government. Some religious conservatives do still believe gay marriage should be illegal because the definition of marriage must be redefined in order to include gay marriage. The traditional definition of marriage includes the central tenet of having children. But most conservatives, including myself, take the libertarian stance on gay marriage, where the state should not be allowed to tell people whether or not they can get married. Oppressing gay people has never been a part of the conservative platform. Oppressing women through the promotion of family values is a nonsensical statement. Promoting family very harshly condemns fathers who abandon their parental duties, as well as advocating for a culture protecting the mother from abuse. The oppressing minorities narrative has no founding in reality. In fact, the conservative fight against abortion actually stands up for minorities because minorities disproportionately use abortion services even though many minority cultures value family. The attacks on family values are unfounded and normally forwarded by people who promote unaccountable behaviors over parenting responsibilities. The second conservative principle is individual liberties. Individual liberties include the right to free speech, the right to bear arms, and other liberties the state can't infringe upon. A central value of conservatism is a concept of negative rights. Negative rights, as opposed to positive rights, are rights the government is not allowed to take away. Positive rights are rights the government provides to the people. In other words, negative rights are liberties, and positive rights are services the government provides. This doesn't mean conservatives don't advocate for any positive rights. Many conservatives still believe there should be a safety net for people who need it. But those people should use the safety net temporarily, and not on welfare for generations. But when the government provides rights in the forms of goods and services, this goes around free market structures, often while using free market infrastructure. That often causes dependency. This dependency caused by positive rights become volatile depending on which party is in power to take the positive right away or provide the right for a select group of people at the expense of another group of people. This makes positive rights a political weapon to wield during every election cycle. Specific liberties, such as the right to free speech and bear arms, are eroded when overreaching policies and bloated government is allowed to infringe on those liberties with overbearing regulation. Standing up against bureaucracy, large government, and heavy regulation is an essential principle to conservatism. The third conservative principle is religious freedom. Religious freedom is important because we must preserve the right for all Americans to worship the way they are called upon to worship as long as their actions are legal. Religious freedoms can fall under the individual liberties principle, but these freedoms specifically are under attack in a very strange way. Let's take the Masterpiece Cake Shop, for example. A religious baker was being forced to bake a cake for a gay wedding, something his faith does not believe in. The left, and even some on the right, went after this baker for discrimination. Setting aside the fact that the couple who requested the cake targeted this bakery because they knew it would come in conflict with their religious beliefs, is it really discrimination to demand a service and the provider of that service to reject that demand? Maybe depending on the requested service or discrimination laws at the time. This particular baker did not deny this couple a cake, but denied to use his artistic skills to decorate the cake to celebrate an event he does not believe in. Using the individual liberties principle, Conservatives generally don't believe someone can demand a service from someone else, and to have the government force that service provider to serve everyone, no matter the circumstances, is basically indentured servitude. Now, the interesting part of these attacks on religious freedoms is why and how a religion is attacked by certain people. In other words, only specific religions are attacked while others are defended by the same people. Using the previous example, Christianity was being attacked for not accepting, or in reality, not serving a gay couple because the baker does not believe in the sacrament they were partaking in. Yet, if we can assume the political ideology of the gay couple prescribed to, that same ideology vehemently defends Islam. Now, I'm not going to take this time to criticize Islam like many other conservatives might, because frankly, I don't know much about the teachings of Islam. But I do know Islam does have similar attitudes toward the LGBT community as Christianity does, if not more extreme. Yet, one is attacked and one is defended. This leads me to believe that it has much less to do with the religion and much more to do with the need to defend what some refer to as an oppressed class. That's what makes the religious freedom principle so unique. It's a political ideology that condemns a religious ideology out of the need or want to defend the oppressed. While promoting and praising, let's say, a comparable religious ideology, they are attacks not based on reaction to human behavior, but on narrative. Religion is also important because people have an innate need or want to worship something in order to put something or someone in front of themselves and finding meaning. In the absence of religion, people often turn to other entities, like the federal government or the environment, for worship, which leads to a dictatorship or false pursuits of utopia. Religious freedom must be defended for all religions. The fourth conservative principle is national security. National security includes securing our borders and fighting our enemies abroad. Securing our borders means having a reasonable amount of border control agents who have the resources to do their jobs effectively, and building a physical barrier if needed to stop the flow of illegal immigration. This does not mean stopping or slowing down legal immigration, since that adds to the strength of our culture and economy, assuming those immigrants are willing to participate in the American experiment, and not to become freeloaders using robust welfare systems or cause more crime. Building a physical barrier is a hot topic in today's political discourse, but no matter whether you support a barrier or not, border security is one of the few protections the federal government is supposed to provide. Again, this goes back to the concept of negative rights, or in this case, protections. Fighting our enemies abroad does not explicitly mean we must start wars and conflicts, which should only be used under a last resort, but includes working with our allies abroad, using sanctions, and condemning poor behavior publicly in order to fight without spilling blood. National security is vital for a strong, independent, sovereign nation. The fifth conservative principle is economic freedom. Economic freedom includes the promotion of the free markets, lifting people out of poverty, and the promotion of the best economic and social ideas. The principle of economic freedom might be the most pushed by conservatives and the most demonized by conservative opposition than any other principle, with maybe the exception of the last principle I'll talk about. For that reason, I'll keep this description relatively short because I will elaborate much more in other articles and podcasts. Also, when I talk about free markets, typically I refrain from using the popular descriptor capitalism because it was popularized as a pejorative term for free markets to try to reduce the promotion of free exchange to the promotion of a system where the only goal is to gain more capital. This is a gross mischaracterization of free markets, which is not really a system at all, but an accurate description of a free or voluntary exchange of goods, services, or ideas. The free marketplace is what people who promote pure democracy wish democracy would result in. Pure democracy is supposed to give everyone a vote so the people can decide on what laws to pass to promote a government for the people. But in reality, a pure democracy devolves into mob rule. A free market, on the other hand, gives everyone a chance to vote on, let's say, the best product in the marketplace. But the electorate involved with the vote are made up of the people inside of that market. To give a better example, let's say I want to buy a tractor for my farm. I want a tractor that does the job efficiently while using the least amount of resources, aka fuel, at the lowest cost. I think it is reasonable to assume other farmers value these characteristics about as much as I do, so the tractor manufacturers will compete with each other to make a tractor fitting these characteristics, which results in the best market value for a new tractor. Now, apply this scenario to a democratic system. I am still a farmer, and I want a tractor that has the qualities I asked for before. But now, everyone has a vote. People who are not farmers may value the look of the tractor over every other quality. Now, tractor manufacturers are forced, because remember, it's democracy, so market value is left out of the equation. But manufacturers now value aesthetics, which drives up cost for something the farmers don't value as high. if at all. This is what happens when people outside of the market who have no investment in that market have influence over production. Again, I will elaborate in the future in articles and podcasts, especially since economics is such a large and complicated issue. People who are critical of free markets often claim people are taken advantage of, or people are so burdened by workload and payments and debt that they are not actually free at all. This is where the promotion of socialism creeps in to the conversation. I'll just end this principle with this. Some people claim capitalism is immoral because it can lead to people being taken advantage of or discriminated against. And those same people claim socialism, or a variation of it, is moral because the outcome is equality for all and less human suffering in the end. The problem with moral arguments is everyone understands what a moral outcome is, but few people understand how to get there. They also don't take into account the moral decisions that must be made in order to achieve a moral outcome. To achieve utopia's socialists want, more immoral actions need to be taken to get there. The forceful taking away of earned capital, the sacrifice of individual liberty, and submission to the state. These are inevitable realities of a fixed economy. The alternative, being free markets, can involve immoral actions. People can take advantage of others. People can cheat the system through corrupt means. People can discriminate. But it isn't necessary for the system to flourish, and bad actors do suffer through the exchange of social capital. The sixth and final conservative principle is cultural preservation. This principle, much like the economic freedom principle, will take several articles and podcasts to unpack, and defend against so many different mischaracterizations brought on by the conservative opposition. This is because culture plays a more important role than people can possibly imagine. But many on the intersectionality and cultural diversity left believe culture is a red herring for racism. This is obviously false because culture is not inherent, nor does it have an absolute association with any particular race. In a country as large as the United States, there are many subcultures inside of the overall American culture, where beliefs such as individual freedom remain at the forefront. As Andrew Breitbart once said, politics is downstream from culture, meaning when the culture shifts, politics will eventually shift with it. People who think inequalities like income and criminal sentencing can be blamed on capitalism or the justice system because they conflate inequalities with disparities. The idea being, for most inequalities, there is an institution or person who can be blamed, whereas most disparities arise due to cultural differences. We can draw the conclusion that culture makes a massive difference by comparing cultural norms from different countries to immigrants in America from those countries. There is no valid conspiracy that explains why Jews, Hasidic Jews more specifically, are successful no matter where they immigrate to. They come from a culture where hard work and education is not only encouraged, but basically mandatory. Family and community are also highly valued by the Jewish community, which is why they become so successful so quickly. When most Jewish families immigrated to America in the 20th century, they started businesses run by the family. By using family relationships as employees of the company allowed these families to spend less money and attention on trusting new employees, as well as making it easier to create hard-working culture that encouraged tireless hours of work, and an emphasis on education to create more efficient industry. Thomas Sowell talks about this in his book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. He explains how Jewish immigrants gravitated towards industries like banking, because it uses their principles of frugality and education to their advantage. It also had low overhead because they didn't produce a physical product, which is why Sowell referred to these groups as middleman minorities. This is also why many groups despise the Jews, because they saw being a middleman as a skill that creates no products. The obvious error made by these groups is middlemen don't create products, but create a service that provides products to people who may otherwise never have the opportunity to use those products. The combination of acting as middlemen and the quick rise to success is why Jews have been, and still are, one of the most attacked groups in the world. To go back to the left's issue with culture, they see the overall culture of America and all of the West as a culture created by and for white men. Some defenders of Western culture may defend it by stating most of Western culture, which has benefited almost everyone around the world, has been founded and forwarded by white men. This may technically be true, but is it really skin color and their genitalia that lead them to create the best societies in the world? Or are they just people who had the advantage, for the most part, of growing up in a culture that allowed them to share their ideas who happened to be white? I personally believe in the latter. And it should go without saying that our culture would not be as successful as it is today without massive contributions by every race and gender. The left's idea of multiculturalism would be, and is, a massive failure because there is no expectation for a culture to assimilate. There will be larger differences in pay, increases in violence, more discrimination, and more inequality. This is what happens when you have cultures in conflict. Culture might be the least talked about principle in conservative circles, most likely because of the relationship people attribute culture to race. But cultural preservation is the most important of all principles. Like I said before, I will elaborate on these principles in future articles and podcasts. I hope this sheds some light on what conservatism really is and how to forward the principles of conservatism. Please note, all principles and descriptions in this podcast are in my own words and may not represent all conservatives. Conservatives are a diverse group of people who believe in variations of the same principles, and I'd be happy to hear feedback on what any listener agrees or disagrees with. I look forward to your feedback. I want to leave you with this final thought. If you're a conservative, people are going to mischaracterize you. The best way to get used to it is being able to subtly defend yourself. This doesn't mean you need to go full Ben Shapiro destroys mode. This means present yourself according to the principles you want to represent. Stick to the issues, no character attacks, defend liberty and freedoms for all, even if you don't agree with everyone's ideology. Let them know you care about protecting the freedoms of all Americans. And that comes before generously allowing anyone to walk across the border into America without going through the proper authorities, no matter how bad their situation is. Tell them that the free markets is more than just a place for rich people to get richer, but is a place where poor people can get the opportunity to make their own mark if they work hard enough. Make sure they understand that protecting Western culture is not preserving white supremacy, because race and culture are not locked together. There is a saying I heard shortly after Trump was elected president. Trump may not be a racist, but all of the racists voted for Trump. There is little debate that if a white supremacist in America votes for a majority party, they typically vote Republican. The simple reason why is because Republicans allow them to spew their nonsense without suppressing their speech. Most white supremacy groups have policies and principles that align much more closely with the current progressive Democrat Party than the Republican. This might be because they have similar roots. But the point is, if every argument is focused through the lens of the oppressed against the oppressor, oppression begins to have no meaning. Maybe we should think about it this way. If everything bad that happens to you is because you are oppressed, how must the oppressors feel when their perfect lives come to an end? With no struggles, there is no story. A life without curveballs can never become a story because it is way too boring. I think this is why oppression has become a commodity. It adds to your otherwise boring story. Maybe instead of becoming the oppressed, become the hero of your story and show everyone how successful you can be. Everyone loves a hero story. Thank you for listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. None of the persons, podcasts, books, or other references other than engineering politics used in this work directly reflect my ideas and/or personal beliefs, nor should they be held accountable for anything said during this podcast.